Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar on responding to the atrocities against Uyghurs in Xinjiang, organized by the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Uyghurs. My name is Evelina Ohab and I'm the co-founder of the Coalition for Genocide Response, which is providing secretariat to the APPG. On 22nd April 2021, British parliamentarians recognized the atrocities perpetrated against the Uyghurs as genocide. This debate was only the second time the UK House of Commons was asked to recognize ongoing atrocities as genocide, with the first being in the case of Daesh atrocities against Yazidis, Christians, and others. This recognition of genocide follows similar determinations made by the US State Department, Canadian, and Dutch parliamentarians. The evidence discussed during the debate, including allegations of mass killings, mass incarceration in camps where Uyghurs would be subjected to torture and abuse, including rape and sexual violence, separation of children from their parents, forced sterilization, forced abortions, forced labor, and much more. And the Chinese government denies these atrocities. Today, the panelists will discuss the needed responses to address the atrocities in line with the duties under the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. And our speakers include Nuri Turkel, American attorney and commissioner with Youssef, Professor John Packer, Director of the Human Rights Research and Education Center, University of Ottawa, Dr. Joe Smith-Finley, Reader in Chinese Studies, Newcastle University. But before I give the floor to our panelists, I would like to give the floor to the officers of the APPG on Uyghurs, Alistair Carmichael MP, co-chair of the APPG, and Nusrat Ghani MP, vice chair of the APPG.
Evelina, thank you very much, and welcome everybody to this webinar. Can I, on behalf of my co-chair, Yasmin Qureshi, offer her apologies. She has other responsibilities for her family that have taken her away today, but I know that she would ordinarily have wanted to be here. Evelina has just touched on some of the recent advance that we have made within the UK Parliament. It's never fast enough, it's never far enough. But I think it's right that we should stop and reflect for a moment the progress that we have made in keeping this on the news agenda and also on the parliamentary agenda in the House of Commons and the House of Lords in recent months. And I am happy as part of an all-party group to pay the warmest possible tribute to our APPG Vice Chair, from whom you will hear in a minute or two, Nusrat Ghani, who was absolutely the driving force behind that parliamentary event in April, and also her colleague Ian Duncan Smith. My colleague in the Lords, Lord Dalton, and the work that he did in relation to the trade bill has also really been a tremendous defender of the rights of the Uyghur population, and has done incredible work in bringing their plight to the attention of the world, and also to put pressure on our own government to go beyond the occasionally platitudinous statements that we get, and to go ahead with meaningful action to help the Uyghur population in their hour of need. I offer you just a few thoughts. We're at the start now of a new parliamentary session, so we have a whole new range of legislation coming forward. We will also have a range of private members' bills, so there will be opportunities for us to keep the Uyghur plight on the legislative as well as the debating agenda within the House of Commons, and I hope that we will be able to do that. The attention of the group has also been focused recently in relation to campaigns to get at least commercial and ideally also supporting boycotts of the Winter Olympics, which are coming up in China, and we'll touch on that later. You will also hear from some speakers this afternoon about the situation in higher education institutes within the United Kingdom and indeed in other Western countries as well. I think that what you'll hear there is something that is actually quite consistent with Chinese foreign policy in other parts of the world. You know, we've seen how in Africa the Chinese foreign policy has gone in building big infrastructure projects, financing them, and then exerting control as a consequence of that. In countries like the United Kingdom, the same things now are being seen in relation to your higher education institutes. And, you know, the rights of academic freedom are ancient and hard won. And if we allow them to slip now, if we allow any sort of compromise in relation to them, then we will damage beyond repair something that I think is a very, very, very precious part of the United Kingdom and our values base. So you're going to hear from the real experts later on. I'm going to hand over to Nusrat Ghani, who had the distinction, if that's the word, of being one of the first parliamentarians to be sanctioned by the Chinese government. I have to say, it doesn't appear to have aged you with the worry of it, Nus. I suspect you probably wear it as a badge of pride, and I absolutely think you should. So thanks for everything you've done, and I'll yield the floor to you now.
Thank you so much, Alistair, and thank you, Evelina, for once again coordinating such a fantastic lineup of speakers. And before we get to the real experts, as Alistair said, us politicians just meddling in these affairs, I just would like to state a few things. One is that the UK Parliament did a profound thing on the 22nd of April by unanimously supporting my motion on trying to understand what the term genocide meant and whether we accepted that the 5 terms of genocide were in fact being met in Xinjiang. Alistair is right, I had the opportunity to move the motion, but we work as a tag team in Parliament. And for those countries that aren't used to how Western politicians work, we do work across the political divide, and we are focused on trying to deliver on an issue. So I could not have done the job that I have done without my colleagues on the Conservative side of the House, which is my side of the House, as well as colleagues from the other side of the House. And I'm grateful for all the work that Alistair has done. And Evelina, what the All-Party Parliamentary Group does, which is keeping us focused on the data, on the research, so we can constantly talk about the Uyghur issue. As Alistair said, I have been sanctioned with a couple of my colleagues, and I believe that I was sanctioned for fundamentally preparing a select committee report, which showed the vulnerabilities in the work that we do in the UK on modern slavery and how that work cannot be conducted when it comes to Xinjiang. So my inquiry asked companies, British companies and international companies, to come forward and to try and establish what due diligence is done when they are procuring products from Xinjiang. And unfortunately, UK companies were able to showcase the brilliant work they did in the rest of the world, but unfortunately it was zero when it came to Xinjiang. And when those big businesses began to challenge those practices and try and move out of the region, they came under huge pressure from the Chinese government. But I think exposing that fundamental gap in the work that we do in the UK that adheres to UK laws or international laws or UK values and modern Western values, and how they completely contradict what's happening in Xinjiang was fundamental in getting me sanctioned. The other item of business which is taking up a huge amount of my time and Alice's time and in Parliament is trying to use every parliamentary procedure we can to ensure that the issue of the Uyghur is front and centre. And that isn't because we are just focused on the gross human rights abuses, because we're also interested in ensuring that we are having a full understanding of our security vulnerabilities if we don't assess what work that we are doing with Chinese companies, for example. Alice has also already touched on academic institutions. And we have G7 coming up in a few weeks' time. And one of my concerns is, how do we protect our hard-won democratic values and standards if we can't stand up to China on an issue so simple and so profound as genocide? And I'm looking forward to the conversation about to take place. We've got some great experts on the line, and I'm happy to take any questions at a later stage. Evelina, thank you once again so much for putting together the panel.
Thank you very much, Nusrat. And now I would like to give the floor to Nuri Turkal.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Evelina, for organizing this event, and I'm pleased to be part of it. And I would like to begin by thanking British parliamentarians, particularly Mr. Carmichael, Ms. Ghani, for their extraordinary leadership on this issue. Ms. Ghani mentioned her being sanctioned. My two fellow commissioners at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom were also sanctioned. It's easy to say it's a badge of honor, but this is truly remarkable, and it shows your work, your leadership has been in fact impactful, getting Beijing's attention. You've been sanctioned for protecting human rights. The Chinese officials been sanctioned for violating individual rights, human rights, and committing genocide. So that's the difference. So I commend you, for your leadership, and I personally profoundly grateful for all you have done in the British Parliament. I wanted to highlight a new phase in the Chinese government's genocidal policy against Uyghurs and the other Turkic Muslims. We have warned the world more than 3 years that the end goal of this policy, initiated, formulated, and implemented by Beijing, is the destruction of Uyghur culture, traditions, language, and faith. The Uyghur people, simply put, have been criminalized for just simply being Uyghur. Chinese state has spent last 4 years crushing Uyghur cultural language, civilization, and accomplishments in poetry, literature, arts, theology, architecture, and scholarship. When you look at the type of people that they rounded up, Secretary Blinken recently said that those 1 million people, or more than 1 million people, don't fit the type of the image that the CCP has been portraying. So basically, they are targeting the Uyghur identity, Uyghur thought leaders, Uyghur leaders in various areas, and scholarship, religion, and cultural aspects. Not only that, they are also engaging in, most recently, a genocide denial campaign. So they are saying things like Xinjiang, the Uyghurs' homeland, is beautiful, therefore there's no genocide. And also they're showing Potemkin villages to their supporters. So what do we do about this? There are a number of things that the liberal democracies should look into. We need to continue to call the Chinese out for their behaviors, conducts, genocidal campaigns. Two things that they care dearly. One, how they portrayed in public. Two, their economic and the technological interests. The United States government announced 74 punitive sanctions that includes adding the Chinese entities to Commerce Department's entity list, sanctioning the Xinjiang Production Construction Corp and the other Chinese officials under the Global Magnitsky Act, visa sanctions. That is not enough. We need to expand this to even the provincial level, the local municipal level, if it's necessary, to send a message that they cannot get away with this, get away with their crimes with impunity. How they've been portrayed, even if it's a symbolic gesture, sends a powerful message. And then two, we need to renew our engagement or efforts with the business community. Yesterday at a hearing, Speaker Pelosi criticized the business community, for example, in the United States, lobbying against the Forced Labor Prevention Act that is gaining steam in the US Congress. The business community still has not really figured out their position yet. They are trying to tell the consumers that they have been doing due diligence, and as you know, that due diligence is impossible on the group of people who have been subjected to a genocidal campaign. And also at the same time, they're using, particularly in the United States, their money, lobbying force to lobby against any executive or legislative actions. So, and also they need to realize that unlike what they have been telling us, that they figured out how to do business, apparently they have not. Fire. The legislators in the United States in particular. So the business community need to step up. We need to continue to pressure and engage at the same time. One thing that the US government could do, and others also could consider doing, is to issue business advisory, reminding them that at the end of the day, there will be ramifications for this. There will be, this is a consequential, this is reputational risk for them. This is there's a legal risk to their ongoing practices using forced labor. And then the technology, as you have been reading, all of the big tech firms, including Apple, recently implicated, reported that they use at least 7 suppliers, questionable suppliers, using forced labor. They have not really stepped up to the plate. They're still feigning ignorance, willfully, I would say. Without technology sector, without the business community, I don't think that we will be able to at least address the ongoing slavery, the enslavement of the Uyghurs. United States remain to be the largest destination as far as the volume is concerned for tainted products from Xinjiang. Italy is also in the same situation. So this is not just exclusively the US problem. And finally, the call to remove the Winter Olympics from Beijing next year is gaining steam, gaining momentum. There are a resolution in the United States Congress that specifically focused on this one particular issue. There have been a discussion publicly. There have been a pressure on the U.S. administration, Biden administration. So the international community should do a few things. One, move this international game to a country that does not engage in genocide. And if that does not work, the international community should pressure to postpone this game. And if that also does not work, I think diplomatic boycott should be something that we should consider in doing. So in conclusion, I'd like to highlight that even though we're facing this monumental challenges, and it does not appear that we're making progress, we are making progress. This has been an impactful. I've been doing Uyghur human rights work for more than 2 decades, and I never even imagined that the Uyghurs will be getting this level of attention. But that attention came with a price, a genocide. It took a genocide in East Turkestan and upending democracy, rule of law in Hong Kong for the international community to realize and learn what CCP is really about. So we need a bigger boat. We need a collaborated effort to tackle these challenges. So we're on the right track, and I commend all of you for your time and efforts and good heart, most importantly, to try to stop this genocidal campaign in China.
Thank you very much, Nuri. And now I would like to give the floor to Professor John Packer.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to address you. And thank you very much for the all-party group, and specifically for the co-chairs, and for all those who have acted with integrity and courage, and I would say consistently to your responsibilities, and incurred what has befallen you. And I think it behooves all of us to stand together to address this extremely serious issue. I would like to comment on really 3 things. First of all, the importance of the subject matter, which I guess might go without saying, but I want to say a few words about it. Second of all, the importance specifically from an international law perspective of applying the hard law instruments we have, notably the UN Charter and the Genocide Convention, as the fundamental framework in which this matter should be treated. And third of all, in this connection to take some caution in avoiding what I would call diversions, which have been raised in this regard, which in fact operates to avoid the application of the hard law and to undermine action. So my first remark is the importance of the subject matter. I really do feel at this moment that we are at a historical point where the significance of what has been the architecture which has been constructed over the last 75 plus years, and specifically the combination adopted within 2 days in 1948, the Genocide Convention on the 9th of December, 1948, which really said that there is a limitation on the state of what it can do for populations within or without its jurisdiction, a kind of negative prescription that groups have a right to exist and the state must desist and take steps to protect. And the second, on the very next day, and I would say not coincidentally, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted, which commits member states of the United Nations pursuant to the Charter to a different vision, which says that the state, in fact, should be contributing to the well-being, to full lives and dignity and rights for everyone everywhere, which is really to reference the Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, we have to understand that this framework itself is a cornerstone of not just international law as some kind of esoteric regime, but of contemporary international relations. Everything else is built upon this, essentially. You know, what sense is there to talk about intellectual property theft or many other things if, in fact, in the most serious of matters, there is no bite, there is no meaning. And I think we're at the point now where our credibility and seriousness of this is really put in cause. I note David Miliband's piece in Foreign Affairs just this week on an age of impunity. I would go further and say we're living now in an age of shamelessness, where member states and with senior politicians are prepared to ridicule in the face of the facts before us, that we not believe our own eyes and we not apply these standards. Yes, we are living in a period of complexity, but in this period of complexity, of increased complex interdependence, precisely the guideposts of hard international law are essential to maintain, for it is that slippery slope if we depart from them, for purposes of legality, foreseeability, reliability, and all those things we know. Now, in this regard, a core element is the protection not just of individuals, but of groups. And really, this is the essence of never again in the Genocide Convention, the very notion of what Churchill said was a crime that had until then no name. There was a crime without a name. And it was articulated in the treaty in 1948, well before, by the way, the pursuit of the development of the Rome Statute fully 50 years later. And that treaty, the Genocide Convention, it specifies in 9 short provisions, a clear applicable law, specific obligations on all states parties, not only not to commit, not to be complicit, but also to prevent genocide or the risk of genocide, to take steps, and to address the facts in the application of public international law, which are those which are attributable to the state and therefore raise state responsibility, which is the basis in which to engage with states. So let's just take a quick look at the treaty briefly, if I may say, and not the specificity of the treaty, but the idea of applying it. There are 152 states parties to this treaty, the United Kingdom being one, my own country, Canada, being another, and importantly in this case, China, which incidentally not only signed and ratified, but essentially did it twice, once in 2 different iterations or articulations. So there's no doubt that the treaty applies. And without specifically determining, quote, a word which has arisen in a lot of politics, the existence or not of genocide, the application of the treaty as such applies between states parties, 152 states. And I think it's very important to insist upon this because China itself cannot decline to say that it is bound by this treaty. And then the question arises, what are the requirements that arise from the treaty? In this regard, let me say that one of the very important diversions which we are now actually facing in a number of places, which is particularly apparent in the United Kingdom, is this nonsensical notion that no action may be taken, no engagement essentially, absent a determination, unless and until a prior determination by a court of law. I just want to make clear that that appears nowhere in any law of which I am aware of any kind. It is not in the treaty. It is not in public international law. It's an actual absurdity. I have yet to be able to determine where in law it arises, even in the United Kingdom. This is an idiocy, if I may put it plainly. Because why? Because states, the basic notion of public international law is that states are sovereign. I mean, it's the height of irony that the United Kingdom, just having on the heels of Brexit, should argue that though it has taken back its sovereignty, apparently it's not sufficiently sovereign to actually exercise a determination of its own responsibility in public international law. International law doesn't care what the domestic mechanism or means is. The state as such is responsible, and that normally means the executive. But let's just think that through for a moment. If it requires a judicial body, that means ex post facto. And it means according to judicial processes, which are not going to be conducive or appropriate for the fundamental object of the convention, which is prevention, because it means you're not going to be able to act in due time and accordingly. So I think this is, we need to be frank, this is essentially a dodge and a real effort to subvert the purpose of the treaty. More than that, let me say that, in fact, there is abundant evidence in the actual case that leads us not necessarily to a determination, in my view, clearly a determination, but nonetheless to the inescapable risk that there is of genocide, and therefore the application of the treaty with regard to the duty to prevent. And now allow me just finally to say what is the other diversion that I think we have to take caution with regard to. And that diversion is the conflation between individual responsibility and domestic criminal law and the idea of state responsibility. A state, of course, cannot be arrested. A state cannot be prosecuted. Formally speaking, a state does not commit a crime and so forth. So what's important here is the character of the regime, the acts which are actually at issue here. This is not one man, a series of individuals. Of course, there are individuals involved, but these are par excellence matters of state conduct. These are policies, programs, laws. They are systematically applied, but they are systemically applied. This is a regime of a genocidal character. And in this case, there is no individual that can be held accountable for this. No individual, for example, necessarily adopts a law. I mean, to give you one example from the case of the Rohingya, often discussed the citizenship law. No individual adopted the citizenship law. No individual can abrogate the citizenship law, and no individual can repair the citizenship law. It is an act of government and state. So it's absolutely imperative here, and I will conclude on this, that in this case, there needs to be focused and a laser attention to the state responsibility. In this case of China, inescapably China, and inescapably the other 151 other states parties to the Genocide Convention and their own responsibilities. And this for the United Kingdom means not only the responsibility not to be complicit and obviously not to engage in the commission of genocide, but to take steps within its own jurisdictional authority and means at the instant that the matter of risk arises, as the International Court of Justice has said, in order to contribute to the prevention of genocide. And that is really the imperative of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. And now I would like to give the floor to Dr. Jo Smith-Finlay.
Thank you very much, Evelina, and thank you very much to the organisers for inviting me to speak today. So I think I'm going to follow Nusgani and just sort of reflect very briefly on why I was sanctioned. I've been doing this work. I've been researching Uyghur identity and the relationships, the very difficult relationship between Uyghur and Han people, Han Chinese people, for over 30 years. And yet it's only now at this juncture that suddenly I'm selected for, you know, as the sole academic in the UK to be sanctioned. So I wonder why this was, and I can only trace it really to the fact that I've recently, in the last 12 months or so, began to consider this concept of genocide. So, so I have published a journal article, a reflection article called "Why Scholars and Activists Increasingly Fear a Genocide in Xinjiang." Now, in here, I looked at the potential genocide in Xinjiang as an example of frontier genocide. Xinjiang, of course, is the colonial name for the Uyghur region, meaning new border, new frontier. So I looked at this particular case of alleged genocide as a possible frontier genocide. I'm also organising a conference coming up in September called the Xinjiang Crisis, Genocide, Ethnocidal Crimes Against Humanity. And we are inviting Uyghur studies scholars, law scholars, genocide scholars, alongside practicing barristers, also Uyghur advocacy groups and Uyghur activists to come along and to put their heads together to try to find the best way to hold China to account for what's going on, and to debate how useful all of these terms are, and which of the terms might actually be the most useful in trying to persuade China to change direction, because this is what we most want to see happening. So, so in that context, I mean, I fully agree with everything that my colleagues have said, and I don't want to repeat anything that's already been said. I think as an academic, maybe I can add two or three things that are specific to the higher education context, maybe. And I think the first thing that's really important going forward is that the UK and other concerned nations have to avoid at all costs entering into a relationship of codependency with China, economic codependency with China. So in the context of higher education institutions, in the UK, for example, we have a problem of the potential dependency of UK universities on Chinese international student fees. And this problem is even more acute in Australia, as we've seen in the news. So, it's really, really important that countries look at, review their funding, higher education funding systems, and review those and revise those in such a way that this relationship of dependency is removed. Because this is the only way in which we can protect researchers who are doing important work like this on potential genocide and crimes against humanity in places like Xinjiang, and also in the context of Tibet and Hong Kong, and perhaps even Taiwan as another situation that's developing. And the second thing I'd like to say as an academic, I think it's really important to separate the Chinese Communist Party from the Chinese people. So, as academics, especially academics teaching Chinese studies, I think we have to prioritize the building of relationships with mainland Chinese students who come to our institutions. And China is currently waging an information war over Xinjiang and also over Tibet and Hong Kong. And doing everything it can to, as Alistair Carmichael said before, take advantage of our sort of soft democracy to use our channels to broadcast its alternative narratives of what's happening in Xinjiang and so on. And I think as teachers and educators, we have a really important responsibility to engage with these individuals, these students, and to encourage them to develop independent critical thinking whilst they are taking our courses. And I've been doing this for many years already with some spectacular results in places. And what we see is among Chinese students is a range of political positions across the spectrum. They are not by any means all repeating the CCP party line. And I think it's really important that we recognize this. And then we also need to take action to protect those students when they return to China. Some of you may be aware of a new Chinese law that's being considered at the moment called the anti-espionage law. Now this law, Article 14 of this law, talks about how China is going to aggressively brief students and scholars, Chinese students and scholars, before they go abroad, and then aggressively debrief them when they come back, even at the border with border interviews. Now, you can see how this is going to develop. You're going to get students being stopped at the border, their devices taken from them, their devices scanned, and sort of very, very in-depth interviews taking place. So I think, you know, we need to separate the CCP from individuals, Chinese people, and do our best to win some hearts and minds on that front as well. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jo. And I would take also, before we proceed with the Q&A, I would like to also say a few words in relation to what can be done or what needs to be done, and especially in relation to the UN. And of course, to prove genocide and other mass atrocity crimes, evidence is crucial. Documenting and preserving evidence at the time of the suspected atrocity is the only way forward. And where the state is involved in the atrocities, it is reasonable to conclude that the state will not collect the evidence that could ultimately implicate it in the crimes. And this is where international bodies play a very important role. And the UN has acted previously to collect and document evidence of atrocities perpetrated in many parts of the world, where it was clear that the state would not or could not do so. And currently, there is no UN mechanism with the mandate to collect and preserve the evidence of the atrocities against Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities in Xinjiang. While some evidence is being collected by researchers, by NGOs, it is doubtful whether the evidence will be collected and stored in a way that would enable it being used in future proceedings. And reports also suggest that some of the existing databases are being attacked by hackers in an attempt to destroy the evidence. And there are several mechanisms through which the UN can act, including at the level of the UN Security Council, General Assembly, and the Human Rights Council. In the case of Bosnia and Rwanda, the UN Security Council established commissions of experts to consider the available evidence, collect further information, prepare an opinion as well in those cases. And then, of course, once those commission of experts confirm that the atrocities amount to genocide, that's when the UN Security Council established ad hoc tribunals to prosecute the perpetrators. More recently, in 2017, in response to the Daesh atrocities, the UN Security Council passed a resolution establishing the investigative team, so-called UNITAD, tasked with collecting, preserving, and storing evidence of Daesh atrocities in Iraq. Among others, UNITAD identified 1,444 suspected perpetrators responsible for the atrocities against Yazidis, including 14 members deemed most responsible for the atrocities classified as crimes against humanity and genocide. And furthermore, the investigative team, UNITAD, has been receiving requests for assistance with domestic proceedings from 14 states. However, of course, where such an action is not possible through the UN Security Council, as paralyzed by P5 vetoes, other UN organs have stepped up. For example, as the UN Security Council was infamously blocked on every meaningful action on the situation in Syria, predominantly because of Russian vetoes, but also a few Chinese vetoes, in 2016, the UN General Assembly established the International Impartial Independent Mechanism, so-called IIIM, for Syria, to assist in the investigation and prosecution of persons responsible for the most serious crimes under international law committed in Syria since March 2011. And the resolution establishing IIIM was strongly opposed by Syria. However, it was adopted by a recorded vote of 105 in favor, 15 abstentions, 15 against and 52 abstentions. And since its creation, IIIM has collected a significant amount of evidence and has been collaborating with 12 jurisdictions to enable domestic prosecutions based on the principle of universal jurisdiction. And lastly, similar investigative and evidence gathering mechanisms have been established by the UN Human Rights Council. Most notably, the independent investigative mechanism for Myanmar in 2018, but also just most recently, a mechanism for Sri Lanka in 2021. As such, the UN organs reflect a significant legacy in establishing mechanisms to collect and preserve the evidence of atrocities. While states have been calling for unfettered access to Xinjiang and China has been delaying it, it is crucial to recognize that a mechanism for evidence collection does not depend on access to the region. Indeed, as it is clear from the examples of IIIM, but also the mechanism for Myanmar, while those bodies have not been granted access to the region, they have been doing this work remotely and ensuring that a step towards justice is being taken. A UN mechanism to collect and preserve evidence of the atrocities against Uyghurs is the next crucial step, and one that cannot be postponed. Without securing the evidence now, the prospects of justice in the future are zero. So this is something that we should also take into consideration. And I absolutely agree with Professor Packer that states have duties and states have to act. And, but ultimately, we also need to maximize the efforts at, for example, the UN to make sure that we at least establish the basic mechanism to collect and preserve the evidence so that we can ensure justice in the future. Okay, so I think now we still have some time. We have good 20 minutes to for questions and answers. I think we could definitely use some of the questions already sent. And maybe just starting with the first question, what can be done to raise awareness? And I wanted also to introduce yet another panelist that we have with us, Rahima Mahmoud, who has been an incredible advocate on behalf of Uyghurs. So if Rahima is with us, she could maybe answer the first question in relation to how can we get involved or how people can get involved.
Thank you very much. Yes, at the moment we have a lot of activities, campaigns that is happening in the UK. Stop Uyghur Genocide that we have, VW campaign. We have also the Uyghur Tribunal is coming up. We would really like people to come and to sign up for the Uyghur Tribunal, to see firsthand of the people giving evidence, and with stop the Uyghur forced labor, that change your shopping habits, boycott some products, and there are also, most importantly, sign up with the Stop Uyghur Genocide campaign. Then you will be updated with the different campaigns that you can participate. We have protests and also Ban Chen campaign, for example. We need your signature. So, and follow us on Twitter and retweet our tweets, and also fight the disinformation campaign by the Chinese government on all social media.
Thank you very much, Rahima. And the next question is from Manjit. Genocide crimes against humanity have been already perpetrated in China. Why was the international community unable or unwilling to take any decisive action to stop genocide or to bring those responsible to justice? If we could maybe start with Professor Packer.
Well, that's a large question, which is really about the nature of international relations and international law. So let me just start by saying that we live in a world in which we do not have exactly supranationality. It's not like the United Nations is above China. In fact, it's quite important to understand that the United Nations is subservient to China and depends increasingly on China for funding, for political decisions, and so forth. So the Secretary General is quite literally a servant to the member states, including China. So the UN does not have a priori rights of entry, for example, or in order to conduct processes internally and so forth. And that's part of the complexity. And of course, China, together with its abundant and growing political reach, is able to reduce the extent in which it may even be subject to ordinary processes. And that's what we have to fight for. That's what we have to challenge, so that the international standards that have been constructed over the last 3-4 generations actually have effect. And that's why I come back to, and the last point that Evelina mentioned, that there is the responsibility of all other states. And in the case of genocide, by the way, it's not just the states parties to the Genocide Convention. It is also, it is a peremptory norm. It's something that applies to all states and all actors. So we should all be acting as much as we can. But I'm sorry to say that we don't yet live in a system globally that is so conducive.
Thank you very much. And Jo? Yes, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, just to pick up on what Professor Packer said about the UN, particularly worrying are the developments at the Human Rights Council. We really badly need to lobby for reform of the Human Rights Council to stop countries with these excruciating human rights records being able to become, members of the council and sit on the Human Rights Council. China in particular is trying really hard to gain influence at the UN, both within the Human Rights Council and within other mechanisms as well. And what it really wants to do is advance its own version of human rights with Chinese characteristics. Now, this is a very different kettle of fish to what we understand, what the rest of the world understands to mean, human rights to mean, as per the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And China's version really is a very basic, it's pitched at a very low level. It's really about the elimination of absolute poverty, and it doesn't really go any further than that. This is what is considered to be human rights in China. And China's also very keen to advance its own authoritarian form of governance, which of course all rotates around the principle of non-interference. And a principle of non-interference in other states' doings and activities, of course, renders the UN remit null and void. So it's a complete non-starter. So yes, I think that's very problematic, and concerned states really need to get together to tackle what is happening at the UN. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We'll go now to Nuri and then Professor Packer again.
Yes, thank you. I agree with my my co-panelists for all the wonderful points made about the UN. UN Secretary General has a very specific task, that is to promote and protect human rights, and then he's even failing the very basics of his responsibility. And I personally, I don't have to mince words, but he's been disappointing, to say the least. He has not said a word to this day on the ongoing genocide. And he is quick to make points on other issues because that does not involve China. So on top of that, we also need to consider maybe just giving up or urging UN to give up this request for unfettered access to the region. We know that possibly and most likely won't happen. That China knows exactly what they're doing. So we need to go beyond the fruitless demand for international delegation to get access to the region and for investigation. So I think instead we should immediately prepare a report based on available evidence. There are mounting evidence, there's a compelling, there's a wealth of information already available. So the UN does not have to wait until for physical presence on the ground to take action. Actually, in February of this year, 50 genocide prevention organizations and experts called for UN commission of inquiry on the Chinese government's atrocity crimes. United States and our allies and partners should push for immediate action to stand up for COI, Commission of Inquiry.
Thank you very much. Now, John, and then Alistair.
Thank you. I just wanted to be brief to pick up on something that Professor Smith-Finlay said, but also totally to support what Nuri Turkal just remarked on. And I'll just say, I was for many years a UN staff member and specifically investigating human rights violations and so forth. So I'm quite familiar with the mechanism. So let's just be clear. It's not just the Council of the UN and its state members that needs to be reformed, which is a question of election. But we have this regime, which we all seem to have a kind of public confidence in, about independent experts and UN staff members. It's just not true. For example, if I give you an example, the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination under the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination is supervised by 18, according to the treaty, prescriptively independent and impartial persons of high moral standing and impartiality experts. But if you actually look, and you can Google this and just click on their CVs, the chairperson of the committee is a former Chinese ambassador, 40-year career from the Foreign Ministry of China, educated in the Foreign Ministry's own university, 1 year spent at Columbia Law School, and sits in the chair. Now, you don't get nominated, and I can't imagine, and I will stick my neck out by assuming that this person is very close to the government of China, if not necessarily a member of the CCP. So the idea that and you know, this goes beyond China. There are 9 members of the committee who come from authoritarian states, 9 out of 18. So I just want to say, you know, for example, as Nuri's last point about you know, unfettered access, the High Commissioner for Human Rights herself depends on re-election, which China gets a say in. Not a single High Commissioner for Human Rights has yet served 2 terms because of this point specifically. And the Secretary General himself is right now trying to be re-elected and can be vetoed immediately by China. You know, and that's why there are discussions about reform, for example, having a single 7-year term and so forth. But just to say, we need to have our eyes open on this and not have some kind of naive idea that the UN is going to solve this and unfettered access will somehow resolve it.
Thank you very much, John. And now, Alistair.
Actually, Professor Packer has really just touched on the practicalities. It was where I was going to go. I mean, listening to John, and can I just say it's lovely. It's like being back as a university undergraduate in a tutorial again. I'm sort of taken back to my own days doing public international law as an LLB undergraduate, and the endless debate about whether or not public international law was properly law. I suspect it's a debate, John, that would rage to this day in certain circles, but I think this whole issue illustrates the point rather well. What I would say is that the biggest enemy of progress, both in reform of the international institutions and also in the pursuit of individual cases, such as the situation in Xinjiang, is what in Scotland we call whataboutery, which roughly translates as what about this, that, or the other. So when I talk about criticism of Chinese Communist Party, the answer, well, what about the support of the United Kingdom for arms sales to Saudi Arabia and their use in Yemen, for example? And you know, that is the way the debate wants to go. Incidentally, for what it's worth, I'm opposed to my government's position in relation to arms sales to Saudi Arabia, because I think when it comes to matters pertaining to human rights, consistency is absolutely critical. And if you want the answer to what about the situation in wherever, then you have to be consistent in your application of and your support for human rights wherever they are found, because as we all know, the defining characteristics of human rights is that they are universal. And if you lose sight of that most basic of principles, then frankly, it doesn't take very long to slip down the slope to where we are today.
Thank you very much, Alistair. And just very briefly commenting also on what Nuri mentioned in terms of the evidence. Of course, there is already a lot of evidence of the atrocities, and the UN mechanism that I'm proposing is not to say that there is no evidence, but to emphasize that we need to collect more. We need to preserve this evidence if we ever want to ensure that justice is being done in the future, however it's going to look like. And there was also a question from our attendees in relation to the unfettered access, whether we should really focus on unfettered access. And as I already explained as well on the examples of Syria and Myanmar, the UN does not have access to those countries, but nonetheless, the mechanism that was specifically established to collect and preserve the evidence have done incredible work remotely, conducting interviews with survivors remotely as well, collecting any evidence that they were able to do remotely to ensure that there will be some kind of justice in the future. And so I think this is, of course, it is important to call for unfettered access, However, if we see that this is not happening, we need to look into other options rather than just waiting and waiting for the response from China. And establishing such a mechanism, that would be one way forward. And we have another question in relation to academic freedom. So I will maybe direct it to Joe first. How can we stand with and protect our academic community who do such important work uncovering the truth of such tragedies as in Xinjiang?
What I just said already about the UK fundings, about the funding system, how you fund universities, this is really important because the more dependent a UK university is on Chinese funding, whether that comes from research or whether it comes from a philanthropist, Chinese philanthropist, or whether it comes from student fee income, wherever it comes from. However, if a university is very dependent on that income, then it will potentially seek to gag its researchers, and there is a possibility that academic freedom will be stifled for that reason. So that's the first thing. I think it's really important, just going back to what was said before about the preservation of the data. Many of my colleagues, myself and many of my colleagues, have really key, really crucial photographic and in some cases footage, video data from our last trips to what has now become our last trip, or my last trip certainly, to Xinjiang in 2017, 18, 19. I think the most recently one of us has been there was 2019, and that was my PhD student. That photographic evidence and video evidence that we got needs to be preserved urgently. And I've actually been in liaison with University IT and also the National Cybersecurity Centre for the last 2 weeks, making sure that all of my devices are secure and my data is secure in the aftermath of the sanction. And we have some really great databases in existence at the moment where we can feed that data to. So that's really important for academics to be supported, for their data to be preserved in those databases. So there we have the Xinjiang Documentation Project at UBC, University of British Columbia. We have the Xinjiang Data Project run by ASPI, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. We have the Xinjiang Victims Database run by Jean Bonin and colleagues, where we have survivor testimonies. All of these databases are going to be really important to support academics to preserve that data. Because of course now we can't get in, and it's getting harder and harder to get that kind of data out. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you very much, Jo. Any comments from others, John?
No, I'll leave that with Jo.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Any concluding comments from Nuri?
I'm good, thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. So I will give the floor to Alistair to conclude.
Evelina, thank you. Just to say on behalf of the all-party group, thank you to you, Evelina, and your colleagues for pulling together this cast list for this afternoon. And thank you for all our participants for what has been, as ever, a truly enlightening and a thought-provoking session. You know, the more I learn about this issue, the more I want to know. And the more I know, the more horrified I become about what is happening. So look, for your participation here today in this webinar, I thank you all. But actually, you know, what I really want to thank you for is what you do the rest of the time when you are doing what you do, whether it's Mina and Nuri or John, you know, the work that you do is basically making the case that we can then take into the political domain in Parliament. And frankly, we couldn't do it without you. So, you know, for your application, your determination, your commitment, and, you know, I take very seriously what Jo said about her position as a sanctioned academic. You know, you have to know, Jo, that there is a tremendous amount of admiration for you and for this sense of solidarity for the position in which you find yourself. So thank you all for your participation. Thank you for joining us and watching this webinar. It is to be broadcast, or it's to be embedded on the APPG website, I think Evelina said at the start. So if there's anything that you want to go back over and find then it will be there for you as a resource. So thank you all, and we will no doubt reconvene a similar panel in the not too distant future. There's never going to be a shortage, I fear, for some time of things to talk about as far as human rights and China and Xinjiang in particular is concerned. So thank you.
Thank you.